The next 24 hours might be the most dangerous window the Middle East has seen in the last 50 years, and most people watching the news right now have absolutely no idea how close the region is to a flashpoint that could pull in everyone from Washington to Tehran to Moscow. You are about to understand something that very few analysts are willing to say out loud, and by the time you finish this video, you will see the chessboard differently than 99% of the people who only skim the headlines. This is not about speculation or fear-mongering. This is about a concrete ticking clock that started the moment a specific set of conditions fell into place behind closed doors in Tehran, in Jerusalem, and inside the fortified command centers that control the most volatile borders on Earth. Something is coming, and the signals are everywhere if you know where to look. Let me take you back exactly 72 hours to a moment that the mainstream media barely covered because it seemed like just another routine military announcement. Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a statement that was carefully worded, deliberately vague, and yet absolutely chilling when you understand the language of deterrence. They said that the Islamic Republic had reached a point of strategic patience that had expired, and that the response to recent provocations would be something that the enemy had not yet experienced in the entire history of the conflict. Now, if you have been following this channel for any length of time, you know that Iran does not make threats like that lightly. When Tehran talks about something the enemy has never experienced, they are not talking about another round of rocket attacks or another limited strike on a forward military base. They are talking about a paradigm shift. They are talking about a move that changes the rules of engagement permanently. And here is what makes the next 24 hours so terrifyingly specific. Intelligence sharing between Western and regional partners has picked up a pattern of movement inside Iran's Western missile bases that matches exactly what happened immediately before the strikes that destroyed 40 F-35s in a single night not so long ago. The launchers are being moved, the fueling sequences are beginning, the targeting data is being loaded, and the countdown clocks inside the command bunkers are ticking toward a window that opens in less than a day. What is about to happen hinges on one central question that nobody in official Washington wants to answer directly. What happens when a nation that has spent decades building a network of proxies, missiles, and unconventional warfare capabilities decides that the cost of restraint has finally exceeded the cost of action? That is the question that Israeli and American intelligence analysts have been wargaming for weeks, and the answers coming out of those simulations are not the kind of thing that gets leaked to reporters for a reason, because the most likely scenario is not a limited exchange. It is not another round of tit-for-tat strikes that both sides can walk away from and call a victory. The most likely scenario, according to the most pessimistic but also the most accurate models, is a coordinated, multi-layered assault designed to overwhelm every defensive layer that Israel and its allies have spent billions of dollars building. And the target set that Iran has reportedly selected is not military infrastructure this time. It is not air bases or missile defense batteries or command centers. The targeting list that has been circulating at the highest levels of Western intelligence points towards something far more destabilizing, something that would not just inflict military damage, but would shatter the psychological sense of security that has allowed daily life to continue in Israeli cities, even during periods of intense conflict. Think about what happened last time, when the F-35s were destroyed on the ground. That was a military catastrophe, make no mistake. Losing 40 of the most advanced fighter aircraft on Earth in 30 minutes is the kind of blow that most air forces never recover from. But here is what most people missed in the aftermath of that strike. Iran did not target civilian population centers. They did not target power grids or water treatment facilities or the kind of critical infrastructure that would have caused mass casualties and triggered an immediate full-scale war. They targeted military assets, and they did so with precision that demonstrated capability without crossing the threshold that would have guaranteed an overwhelming response. That was a message. That was Iran saying, we can hit you accurately, and we can hit you in a way that your defenses cannot stop. But the message was also restrained because Iran understood something that their adversaries sometimes forget. They understand the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. They understand that destroying an air force is not the same as destroying a nation. And they understand that the real objective, the thing they have been working toward for years, is not a single spectacular strike. It is a fundamental reordering of the balance of power that leaves their enemies unable to respond effectively, no matter what Iran does next. Now we arrive at the next 24 hours, and here is where the story takes a turn that even seasoned analysts are struggling to process. According to signals intelligence that has been corroborated by 3 separate sources operating independently of one another, Iran has moved a significant portion of its most advanced precision-guided ballistic missile inventory into launch positions that are not located inside Iranian territory. That is not a typo. The missiles are not inside Iran. They have been pre-positioned in locations that give them flight times measured in seconds rather than minutes to their intended targets. Some of these launch positions are inside Iraq, where Iranian-aligned militias control territory that Israeli and American surveillance aircraft cannot overfly without risking direct engagement. Some are inside Syria, where Russian air defense systems create a complex web of permissions and prohibitions that make preemptive strikes extraordinarily risky. And some, according to the most alarming reports, are inside locations that no one is willing to name on the record, because confirming their existence would itself be an act of war. What this means is simple, but devastating. If Iran decides to launch from these forward positions, the warning time available to Israeli and American defense systems drops from minutes to seconds. In some cases, the flight time is so short that the first indication of an attack will not be a radar track or a satellite alert. The first indication will be the explosion. Let me pause here because I want you to really feel the weight of what that means. For decades, the entire strategic architecture of the Middle East has been built around the assumption that Iran's ballistic missiles, while numerous and increasingly accurate, still had to fly 1,000 kilometers or more to reach Israeli territory. That distance created time. Time for early warning satellites to detect the launch. Time for radar networks to calculate trajectories. Time for interceptor batteries to be queued and for defensive missiles to be fired. Time for civilian populations to reach shelters. That time was the buffer that made deterrence possible. That time was the reason that Iran could not simply launch a surprise attack that would overwhelm Israeli defenses before anyone knew what was happening. But if the missiles are already forward deployed, if they are sitting on launchers inside Iraq or Syria or some other location within a few hundred kilometers of Israeli borders, then that time buffer evaporates. And when the time buffer evaporates, the entire calculus of deterrence changes. Suddenly, the question is no longer whether Iran can penetrate Israeli air defenses. The question is whether Israeli air defenses can even be activated before the missiles have already reached their targets. This is not theoretical. This is not some worst-case scenario dreamed up by paranoid defense contractors trying to sell more systems. This is the assessment that has been briefed to the Israeli cabinet in emergency sessions that have been kept completely off the public record. This is why the next 24 hours matter so much. Because Iran has reportedly set a deadline for itself, a deadline tied to ongoing diplomatic negotiations that are happening in a European capital, negotiations that Tehran has concluded are going nowhere and will never produce the sanctions relief and security guarantees that Iran has demanded for years. The word coming out of those negotiations is that Iran's leadership has given its diplomats one final window to achieve a breakthrough. And if that window closes without results, the military option that has been prepared for months will be executed. That window closes in the next 24 hours. So when you hear people say that the next day could change everything, understand that they are not exaggerating. They are describing a countdown clock that is real, that is ticking, and that no amount of wishful thinking or diplomatic spin can stop. What would an attack look like if Iran decides to pull the trigger? The most detailed assessments suggest a 3-phase operation designed to achieve multiple strategic objectives simultaneously while keeping the conflict from immediately escalating into an all-out war that nobody wants. Phase 1 would be the decoy and saturation wave. Hundreds of drones, some of them capable of carrying explosives, many of them cheap and simple enough to be produced in massive quantities, launched from multiple directions simultaneously. The goal of this phase is not to inflict damage. The goal is to overwhelm Israeli Air Defense Command and control networks, to force the activation of every battery, to consume every available interceptor, and to create confusion about what is real and what is a feint. This is exactly what happened in the strike that destroyed the F-35 fleet, and it worked then. There is no reason to believe it would not work again. Phase 2 would be the precision strike wave. This is where the forward-deployed ballistic missiles come into play. Targeting intelligence reportedly focuses on 3 categories of objectives. First, remaining Israeli air power, including any F-35s that survived the previous strike, and any F-15s or F-16s that have been relocated to bases that were not hit last time. Second, Israel's missile defense batteries themselves, the Iron Dome launchers, the David Sling systems, the Arrow anti-ballistic missile interceptors, all of which are fixed sites that have been mapped and targeted with the same precision that destroyed the aircraft shelters. Third, and this is the category that keeps military planners awake at night, command and control nodes. The underground bunkers where Israeli political and military leadership would attempt to manage a multi-front war. If those nodes are hit, even if the hits do not destroy them completely, the resulting disruption in communication and coordination could paralyze Israel's ability to respond coherently for hours or even days. Phase 3 would be the opening of multiple ground fronts simultaneously. This is the part of the plan that most Western analysts have underestimated because they think of Iran's proxies as separate entities with their own agendas. They are not. Hezbollah in Lebanon, with its arsenal of over 150,000 rockets and missiles, is not acting independently. The Houthis in Yemen, who have already demonstrated the ability to strike deep into the Arabian Peninsula and beyond, are not freelancing. The militias in Iraq and Syria are not rogue actors. They are all components of a single integrated command structure that answers ultimately to Tehran, and they have all been positioned, supplied, and briefed for exactly this moment. If Iran launches its missile and drone strikes, those proxies will open their own fronts simultaneously. Hezbollah will unleash its precision-guided missiles against Israeli military and infrastructure targets. The Houthis will escalate their attacks on Red Sea shipping and possibly launch longer-range missiles toward Israel. The Iraqi militias will target American bases and diplomatic facilities across the region. The result would not be a single war between Iran and Israel. It would be a regional conflagration involving at least 6 countries, multiple non-state actors with tens of thousands of combatants, and the real possibility of direct American military intervention on a scale not seen since the Iraq War. And here is where the next 24 hours become truly terrifying, because the American response to this scenario is not a known quantity. The Biden administration, and now the current administration, depending on when you are watching this, has spent enormous political capital trying to avoid a direct military confrontation with Iran. They have sent carrier strike groups to the region as a deterrent. They have built coalitions to defend shipping in the Red Sea. They have conducted limited strikes against Iranian-backed militia facilities, but they have not crossed the line into direct war with Iran itself, and there are powerful voices inside Washington arguing that crossing that line would be a catastrophic mistake. The problem is that if Iran launches the kind of multi-phase, multi-front attack that has been planned, the pressure on any American president to respond forcefully would be overwhelming. Not responding would be seen as a sign of weakness by every ally and every adversary around the world. It would call into question the credibility of American security guarantees from Seoul to Berlin to Riyadh. But responding means risking a war with a nation that has spent decades preparing to fight exactly that war. A nation with the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, to launch hundreds of missiles at American bases and ships, and to turn the entire Persian Gulf into a shooting gallery. There is no good option in that scenario. There are only bad options and worse options. The wild card in all of this, the factor that nobody can predict with any confidence, is how Israel's leadership would respond if Iran's attack causes mass casualties. Israel has a doctrine that has guided its military strategy since the founding of the state. That doctrine is simple. Any attack that inflicts heavy civilian casualties will be met with a response so overwhelming that the attacker regrets ever considering the option. This is the logic behind Israel's disproportionate response strategy, the idea that the cost of attacking Israeli civilians must always exceed any possible benefit. But here is the problem with that doctrine in this specific moment. Israel's conventional military options against Iran are limited. The Air Force has been degraded. The distance to Iranian targets is enormous, and any strike on Iranian territory would almost certainly be interpreted as an act of war, requiring a full-scale Iranian response, potentially including the use of missiles that Iran has never deployed before. So Israel is faced with a nightmare scenario. They have been attacked, potentially with significant casualties. Their doctrine demands a devastating response, but their ability to deliver that response is constrained, and the consequences of attempting it could be even worse than the attack itself. That is the kind of trap that military strategists spend their entire careers trying to avoid. And Israel is sitting inside that trap right now. Let me give you a specific number that should grab your attention. According to the most recent Defense Intelligence Assessment, Iran has approximately 3,000 ballistic missiles of various ranges and capabilities in its inventory. Not all of these are accurate enough to be useful against point targets. Not all of them are mobile or survivable. But even if only a fraction of them are employed in a coordinated attack, the numbers quickly become overwhelming. Israel's entire inventory of interceptor missiles across all its defense systems is measured in the hundreds, not the thousands. and each interceptor can only engage one incoming missile at a time, assuming perfect conditions and no decoys, and no electronic warfare and no saturation tactics. The math is brutal and inescapable. Iran can fire more missiles than Israel can intercept. That is not speculation. That is arithmetic. And arithmetic does not care about politics or diplomacy or wishful thinking. What makes the next 24 hours so uniquely dangerous is not just the military math, though that is alarming enough. It is the psychology of the moment. Both sides have painted themselves into corners where backing down has become almost impossible without losing face, losing credibility, and losing the respect of allies and enemies alike. Iran's leadership has been promising a response to Israeli actions for weeks. Every day that passes without that response erodes their deterrence and invites further Israeli strikes. Israel's leadership has been promising that any Iranian attack will be met with a response that Iran has never seen. Every day that passes without an attack allows Iran to continue building its forward-deployed forces without interference. The pressure on both sides is building toward a release point, and the release point is measured in hours, not days or weeks. There is a scenario, a narrow one but a real one, where the next 24 hours do not produce a catastrophic war. In that scenario, diplomatic backchannels that have been quietly operating throughout the crisis finally produce a formula that allows both sides to de-escalate without admitting defeat. Iran gets something it can call a victory, perhaps a partial sanctions relief or a commitment to stop certain Israeli military actions. Israel gets something it can call a victory, perhaps a commitment from Iran to pull back its forward-deployed missiles or to restrain its proxies. Both sides declare that their strength has deterred the other from further aggression, and the world breathes a collective sigh of relief. That scenario is possible. It is even plausible given the history of near misses between these two adversaries, but it is not likely. The gap between what each side demands and what each side is willing to concede is too wide. The trust between them is too thin. The military preparations on both sides have gone too far to be easily reversed, and the clock is ticking. So where does that leave us as observers, as people who are not sitting in war rooms or command bunkers, but who still have to live in the world that these decisions will shape? It leaves us in a place of uncomfortable uncertainty. The next 24 hours will tell us whether the Middle East is about to enter a new era of open warfare between major powers, or whether the region will once again pull back from the brink at the last possible moment. The signals are contradictory, the intelligence is fragmentary, and the human beings making these decisions are tired, stressed, and operating with incomplete information under impossible pressure. That is not an excuse for what might happen. It is simply the truth of how crises unfold in the real world, not in clean academic models or tidy news segments. I want you to hold on to one thought as you watch the headlines over the next day. The difference between war and peace in this moment comes down to a handful of people making decisions under conditions that none of us would wish on our worst enemies. A commander in a bunker deciding whether to launch. A politician on a secure phone call deciding whether to compromise. An intelligence analyst deciding whether to sound the alarm or wait for more confirmation. These are human decisions, fallible and emotional and shaped by exhaustion and fear and pride. And they will determine whether the next 24 hours are remembered as the prelude to catastrophe or the moment when disaster was narrowly averted. That is the weight of the moment. That is why the next day could change everything. And that is why paying attention right now, understanding the forces at play, and seeing the situation clearly without the fog of propaganda or wishful thinking matters more than it has mattered in a very long time. What do you think happens when that window closes? Do the diplomats find a way out, or do the missiles fly? Drop your read on the situation in the comments. I read every single one, and the conversation in this community is always sharper than anything you will find in the mainstream. If this analysis helped you see the chessboard more clearly, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next breakdown. The situation is fluid, the intelligence is updating constantly, and I will be back with another deep dive the moment the picture becomes clearer. Until then, stay aware, stay critical, and do not believe the headlines until you have looked at the underlying realities for yourself.